All right, Bill, do you want to get us kicked off?
We've got to get off mute there. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to our pre-Thanksgiving advisory committee meeting. A little bit on in terms of safety moment, speaking of Thanksgiving, traveling tips. Arrive early at the airport. Anybody who's flown recently has experienced or seen the lines, so making sure you arrive at the airport early is important. If you're driving somewhere, given the price of gas, using gas apps actually is a good idea. I know I've used that to my advantage. Pack food and snacks. I mean, if you're going to be going to the airport or going to be driving, either one would be important to have some snacks if you're going to, it's going to be a little bit longer. Also bring extra protective COVID-related things, extra masks, sanitizer wipes, and if you can, travel on non-peak days. Try not to travel on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. But so those are my Thanksgiving driving tips for the day.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. We're so glad that you're here and spending a couple of hours with us this morning. Quick overview of our agenda. Check, we've done item 1, our safety moment. We're going to hit very at a high level on an update on our system optimization plan, which is making very good headway, I'm happy to report. And then we have a variety of people joining us today that will help us talk through various aspects of the mobility plan for the future. So we're going to get to touch on some exciting things that have been happening sort of behind the scenes. Amy Ford's going to talk to us a bit about mobility as a service within RTD, mobility on demand, and some of the first and last mile recommendations. We have our WSP partners here to speak a little bit about zero emission fleets and facilities, battery electric bus information, and some of the analysis that's been occurring there. We're going to talk a bit and give an update on partnerships and where we are with that. We've completed a service boundary analysis, which I think is provides some insights, and then some preliminary workforce recommendations. Then I'll report out what we heard from you from the last time, the technical working group, as well as you all and the Citizens Advisory Committee on the scenario planning key findings that from last time. And of course, we'll always give an update on next steps and public engagement, what's happening in that front as well. Let's see, I see there's some chat, so I'm going to just zip over here to the Oh, Kate, that is so good. It's so seriously true. I actually had a on our last meeting, the technical working group, I had my kids, like, I don't know if they were playing or fighting or what, but there was so much chaos in the background. So I also needed a safety moment for that. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right in. We've already done our safety moment. Quick update on the system optimization plan. If we go to the next slide, oh, that's perfect right there. We held our first round of service sector meetings. We talked about this at our last meeting. As you'll recall, there were 5 service sector areas that RTD has defined, largely based on travel markets. We were able to conduct small group meetings with each of these service sector groups with the technical working group, and I know some of you were able to join us as well. Got some really good feedback. We were very focused on the local services and what's happening at that local level and mobility on demand, and getting some feedback from those small groups about what are they really seeing on the ground at the local level, at the local agency level, to make sure that we're putting a system optimization plan in place that responds to that. So some of the feedback that we got, I think we've heard this a lot, not just at that local level, but just throughout the process, is the Reimagine process is a better definition of partnerships and the IGA process used by RTD. There's a need to market the services as they build back, make sure that people are aware that the services are out there, come back to RTD, let's get back on the bus and on our trains and ride them into work and ride them for our other travel needs as well. Identification of areas of focus. So several people identified, this particular office complex, this senior housing facility, we need to really keep an eye on them as we move into making identifications for that system optimization plan. Also a desire to make sure that while in, next year, these may not be in place, but we know there's growth and future land use modifications coming. So we want to make sure that we have that in mind as well. And then encouragement of RTD to continue discussions with CDOT and other partners to make sure that we're considering that as well. Our second round of these meetings, the local area meetings, is scheduled to occur actually, it ended up being the second week of December. So I'm hoping to get those on the technical working group calendar later today. So if you're interested, again, just like the last time, if you're interested as an advisory committee member in participating, let me know. Otherwise, we're asking the technical working group to be the liaison for making invitations to other people. So we'll send it to the technical working group members, and we're asking that they forward to other people that might be interested as well. So I think that's the whole update there. Okay, so the next steps, the equity analysis for the system optimization plan has been completed. So we talk here about it being early November. It is complete. RTD has had an opportunity staff has had an opportunity to take a look at that and make sure that the recommendations do in fact meet that Title VI requirements. Now RTD staff is meeting with the individual board members and having those small, I think they're one-on-one, two-on-two meetings with the board members to review the route by route recommendations that are being made and included in that system optimization plan. So that's happening now and into early December. Then I already mentioned those service sector meetings. The second round of those will occur that second week of December. So that's that third line down there. Then we'll be seeking public input on that, what we refer to as the 2027 SOP route level changes will be going out to the public through RTD's more typical process in early January. Then it will go to the board of directors, to the operations committee in January. And then we have a couple more steps in January and February that will take place, and then board adoption of the what will go into place May 2022 will occurs in March 2022. So there's a whole process that takes several months to get through when RTD makes changes to the system. So what will go in place in May 2022 will actually be adopted by the board in March of 2022. So any questions on that process that's occurring? I would say we got very good feedback from the local agencies and the technical working group, the small groups in those meetings that we had the first round. So I'm excited to continue those and dig in farther with this route by route recommendations. So any thoughts, questions, suggestions you have for us on moving forward with those? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't think I can see hands, but no, I don't think so. Okay, let's go into the next section then. Amy, do you want to take us away with some mobility plan for the future discussion?
Absolutely. As we go into the mobility plan of the future, I think that we wanted to just sort of reframe again where we were with what we're looking at, how we look at our current state and move ourselves into our future state. And Holly, at the little here towards the end of the meeting, is going to talk about the scenario planning that you all were working on the last meeting and really giving us sort of insights and guidance on, depending on the future, which way we should go. But I wanted to set the stage a little bit as we got into our recommendations on policy and operations with some of that future state. I think that we all realize and presume that the future is going to be moving into also an on-demand world. And I say that, though, not understanding that high capacity fixed transit services and mobility services will be core always to the role of RTD. But that on-demand future, and a future where we start thinking actively about how we just not manage the supply that we provide and that we put out on the road and put out on the street, but how we engage with the demand part of that. How do we work with our riders? How do we work with the public to engage in the demand part? We're going to talk about that on the MOS parts. And then lastly is that role of mobility integrator. This concept that RTD serves as the integrator within the region for mobility services, not necessarily providing all of those mobility services, but serving as the backbone and the platform by which we can integrate those mobility options for the public as we move forward to the future. So when we talk about, I'm sorry, the slides are, I'm also controlling the slides and they're moving a little slowly. There we go. So as we get into how we think about mobility as a service, we really want to come back to it as a core of mobility as service being the backbone and the platform for how we engage our customers. That is really the priority. And we wanted to be able to establish that priority in regards to what it meant as you looked at the strategic planning process that RTD has been doing here over the last customer months. And ultimately, MOS is at the core of how do you create a seamless customer experience, easy, intuitive, simple, accessible to all, that is allowing us to be able to bolster different kinds of connectivity through partnerships and the like. But that's at the core of what we're talking about when we talk about that customer engagement and mobility as a service. So when we talk about the recommendations, one of the things that we are getting into is how we think about the roadmap to get to that future. So a lot of the recommendations that you're going to see that we're talking about today might seem a little inside baseball in the sense that they are really focused on RTD as a whole, how it should organize, how it should move forward, how it should continue some of its strategies as they're going and new strategies moving forward too. So the first is about organizational structure and the idea that we elevate mobility as a service, this idea of customer excellence to be a core of what RTD does, to be able to establish a 5-year customer experience mobility integrator strategic plan and to develop the organizational approach that matches that. What does it mean to pull in and to coordinate all of the people who are working in the customer arena from the service side, but most importantly also from the customer digital experience, the integrations, how you think about your marketing, how you think about your customer interactions with your 511 service and the like. And so we're really starting to structure and provide some insights, some ideas about what those organizational approaches could look like, how it's a cohesive experience that runs across the different silos of the organization that pulls that together. We're also talking about different kinds of integration approaches organizationally. There are a number of cities and others around the country, and frankly around the world, who are thinking differently about how to do this, where RTD is a part of that mobility integration service, but it is actually maybe in a public-private partnership, a joint venture partnership, where you think about taking things like platforms like trip planning and trip payment, and you take that as an integrated mode that is managed, if you will, by a nonprofit organization or others that are outside, but that RTD is a part of, perhaps helping to fund, perhaps helping to staff, but that it is an integrated approach that includes cities and others. So those are two recommendations structurally that we are looking at. The other piece that we're looking at is at the core of what a lot of people think about when they think about MOS, mobility as service, which is how do you interface with the customers? So the reality is that RTD is still leading in the country when it comes to thinking about trip planning and payment platforms. And a part of that leading effort is that RTD has been doing it in two ways. And we're suggesting that we keep going in those two directions. RTD has prioritized developing its own platforms. So in other words, when you get onto your phone and you buy your ticket, your smart ticketing app, or you can get onto your phone and get to your Ride Next app, or you could get onto your phone right now and you could look at how do you coordinate a flex ride. All of those systems are good and they're being built. They're not all together yet, so they're not quite seamless yet. So there's a next step in how to prioritize doing that. There's also a step, though, in how you continue to prioritize the working relationships with all of the outside partners who are also looking at coordinating mobility, from Uber to Transit App to Google to others. And we're suggesting we need to keep creating the staffing mechanisms and the support and the data exchange and the others to be able to keep moving in that direction. But at the core of all of this is really where the future is really going, and this is where RTD is managing itself into an account-based system that allows you all to be able to manage exactly the relationships with the customers, to be able to layer in a variety of different incentives, programs, efforts for those customers. So use me as an example. Amy 4 now has an account with Rtd. It's a mobility account where I am using that to debit out when I get onto the bus. It's a mobility account that I can, because Holly has put money into me as a commuter for work, that I am able to use that to have a discount. Perhaps I'm a person who also qualifies for a low income discount. That also is applied into my account. That type of account management is absolutely the future. And we're recommending strongly that Rtd not just embrace its approach to that, but actually accelerate it, continue to move forward and create a very distinctive and definitive vision about how to do that user interface. It's also one that is a heavy focus on equity and where it needs to go with equity and accessibility. That account is not just something that you need a phone to access, but a smart wristband, or how you can go to a CVS and be able to access those accounts and be able to get onto your ride. So ensuring that equity is a part to that. So I'll stop there and continue, guys, to ask questions on the chat as I continue to talk, and we'll just run through these really quickly. The last two areas we have recommendations in the MOS section is related to the service partnerships. And we're going to talk a little bit about this more in the on-demand mobility side. But how we transition Rtd as not just a public transit agency, but one as a mobility integrator via those partnerships and information. So this means actively choosing to build relationships with different mobility providers, from bike share to car share to scooter share, recognizing that the cities may in some parts be developing some of those relationships, but that Rtd creates the active interfaces from their infrastructure to their integrations with their trip planning to the like, to be able to ensure that those mobility services are there at people's fingertips. And that sounds easy, and I know we've all been talking about it, but there's a lot of work behind how to do that and how to work on that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the other section. The last piece of this is in regards to demand management. And that is back to this whole concept. We have been really good about putting a lot of supply out, and we have a marketing program that encourages people to ride and ride. But demand management is something a little bit more than that. But demand management is more than marketing. It is about how you generate demand, and it really does an integration of your infrastructure to your wayfinding, to how you think about your marketing, to how you think about the integration of the different services. And so as we put this future together, creating again a broad strategic demand management generation vision, building on what's already come out of the first mile, last mile plan, but then working with our partners and our locals to be able to implement those, that is where sort of this future goes. And that last part of that future that I described related to the account-based system, for instance, like with me, that the services and the platforms that Rtd creates continue to serve as that mobility wallet for the future for the region, that my mobility is accessed via these tools. And this really builds to a future that creates that seamless approach. So I'll stop there and see if there are any thoughts or questions as we get into this. And if they're not, that's okay, because I know there's quite a bit in here, and a lot of it may sound like, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So Amy, just the John Terry call. I'm not on camera in my running clothes. So, just when you talk about demand management, and I guess this is a broader point here, there's nothing in that I've seen in here, and maybe you'll address it later, that speaks to a vision for increasing ridership, for increasing the attractiveness of transit, and a vision for what that would look like. Like, what do we think the future could be for the percentage of riders on transit and how we might get there? So, I appreciate that you're talking about how we drive people there, but I don't see a vision for that and a goal of that. So that's just a question.
I'll jump in here, Amy. So I think that's a good point, John. And I don't know if you were able to join us last month when Dr. Cog came and spoke to us. I think it's very multifaceted, right? I mean, what Dr. Cog had done some scenario planning for their 2050 plan. And I think the takeaway from that, or at least one of the key takeaways from that, is the importance of tying the transit and the land use together. So RTD, I think one of the things that, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the boundary analysis too, one of the things that I think needs to come out of this, and I think this is a small piece of this, mobility as a service and mobility on demand is one piece of that, but making sure that the person using it has a good experience, right, is what that's really focusing on. Then the other is the service going where I want it to go, and are the land uses, and is it frequent, and are the land uses supportive of me even accessing transit and transit accessing the land uses. So I think there's an opportunity for us more holistically to talk about how RTD coordinates with local agencies on their land use planning, and make sure that there's a good seamless conversation, because obviously RTD does not have that direct control over the land use. But coordinating and making sure that we're speaking the same language and that we're all pointed in the same direction for our region's goals is going to be really important. So I appreciate that comment. Feel like maybe that does need to rise a little bit more to the top. I'm not sure it's in this particular section, but in general, in the mobility plan for the future, I think that's a good point for us to try to bring forward a bit better.
Holly, excuse me, it's Jackie Millay, and I'm not sure why I'm not on camera, because I actually got dressed and put makeup on, but my camera's not working. That you know, it is what it is.
Yes.
So I really want to elevate John's comments. I really think the user experience needs to be prioritized in this conversation about customer engagement and returning existing ridership, past ridership to RTD. The city of Lone Tree has already invested in land use planning and has the jobs and the higher density residential surrounding our light rail stations. And we're still not seeing a return to ridership. And frankly, there's a safety issue that I am continuing to hear from my community. In fact, my council member shared with me at our council meeting last night that he was on the train witnessing a drug deal that went down right at the front of the train. He was near where he followed all the right rules. He was up near the front of the train, near the driver. A man got on with no shirt, proceeded to take all of his clothes off outside of his boxers. Another guy got on the train. They exchanged a baggie and the clothes, and then they both got off at another stop. There are real safety issues and comfort level with the riders on the trains, and that really needs to be addressed, in my opinion. It's even just walking around some of the platforms, it's not a comfortable experience, and I think that does need to be addressed. We're not going to get ridership in the future if we can't get the ridership back today. So
yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
That's a really good point, Jackie. And, as we talk also about sort of the seamless part of the experience, pieces attached to this from an account management perspective and the like, as you sort of think broadly to the future, is also about how you start identifying and creating those incentives as well. I mean, think about your Lyft account or your Uber account. You get you get $10 off, come ride. How do we pass through sort of different kinds of pass programs and the like? Obviously, we are not talking about that in the sense that the Fair Equity Study is really tackling some of those pieces too. But how we sort of create those mobility integrations is an important element. If, think back to even the governor's budget right now, where he is looking at proposing free transit during high air quality days. And I think that, how you do that and how you allocate that and how you also identify people on an individual side versus a bulk blanket side. I think those are important things also as we start thinking through some of these approaches, that seamless interaction is important too. Yeah.
I agree, Amy, but if people don't feel safe in the system, it doesn't matter what you do. And I really think the safety issues need to be addressed on the trains.
Yeah. It's a huge, and it was an issue pre-pandemic, and I do think it's escalated even since the pandemic, and ridership is low. So yes, I totally agree. Bill, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there is the other customer piece of this, which I think Mayor Millay and John spoke to, that again, we need to address, and it is safety, reliability, and cleanliness. And I know that those are they're fundamental to our system in transit, and obviously we need to work on that. And I think, what we're talking about now with Amy is focused on, kind of how we're going to an engagement with the customer, a little bit different than what we do today, and trying to transition. But the core piece of what you're talking about, yes, it's important that we do need to work about, and we do recognize that. I think that's, when we've had this conversation, recognizing that that is a big piece of what we need to do and what we need to improve on as we move forward.
Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect the aspects that Amy is talking about, mobility as a service in particular. Our intent would be to, as John was asking, well, what difference does it make numerically? I mean, are these things that you can, for the future, identify, does this move the needle? Is this going to get more people back on transit? And we certainly want to do that. The difficulty is, globally, we just don't know a whole lot yet about how much these things move the needle, but we do know that our customers want them. And from that perspective, we'll continue to push forward. Ideally, I'd like to see, well, hey, how much more ridership can we get from doing X, Y, or Z? And then you can put some numbers to it and talk to stakeholders about the difference that it makes. Hopefully, we'll know even more of that as we get closer, but that's always the intent, is these things are important to the customers, yet it's a little bit tricky, at least right now, to say that this could increase ridership by X%.
Yeah, and maybe just the last comment just would be that you said it's unstated. So I would say state it. Our goal is to drive transit use for all these values, the environmental values, the land use values, the convenience values. That to me, maybe it's right up front, but it should be part of this vision.
Very good point. And actually, it's relational to some conversations that Holly and I were just having about exactly how we angle and present these kinds of recommendations. Which actually,
similarly, we were talking about, like, what if your initial filter for everything that you're doing is the capturing, does this investment capture more ridership? That's like your first filter for any expenditure. This is just we have not landed that, but as a possibility, like, should that be RTD's first filter for anything that they're doing? Are you capturing more ridership? Because that's what we're really trying to do. And those could be safety, to Mayor Malay's point. They could be safety things. Yes, like, I'm not going to get on unless I feel safe, right? They could be land use supportive things. They could be more frequency. It could be an additional route. There's a lot of ways that there's a lot of areas where that could be supported, but kind of like that as your first filter.
and as we move into the on-demand mobility section, really the priority is about how do we think about access to outcomes, to be able to provide that increase to access to transit services, which also creates a sort of tailored, flexible mobility experience. But I think one of the things that I want to frame here is there is transit ridership, and then there are shared mobility services. And in that future of mobility integrator, which came out very strongly through the scenario process, which people said that this is part of RTD's future and where we want to go, that it is also about how we create that tailored and flexible experience. And so you can see again some of the alignments that we have. And a core focus of this is in regards to the local connectivity, in regards to partnerships. So as we talked about this, again, sort of focusing from an organizational structure perspective, but we wanted to get into some of the discussions that also were coming out of the on-demand mobility meetings already that have been starting with our local partners here over the last few weeks. So the proposals are creating a defined, definitive structure within RTD on how to create local partnerships in the local engagement process that allows for local service continue to thrive and foster. So again, we're talking also now more about the on-demand side of this, rather than the high capacity fixed route services, which are the core and the functionality. And very frankly, let's be honest, will be absolutely what drives the increase of transit ridership. That will be the core of it. These numbers will be smaller, but they are also, again, things that people are seeing and wanting and very much going to be part of this future, that access at your fingertips. So the proposal is to really look at where we have our flex ride opportunities, but then through a series of different work that we've been doing in the SOP to be able to establish more expanded what we call mobility on demand service operation zones. So, and I'm going to show maps and things like that in this particular session, but establishing these service operation zones that layer in density, that layer in equity considerations, that layer in an opportunity. Within that opportunity zone structure, then to be able to create an local engagement process that allows us to go through and how we establish effectively a menu of services that works with our local partners to be able to implement that. So you can see I'm jumping between recommendations here as we talk about that. When we talk about menu of services, and this is down in this local partnership, this is about menu of services that include microtransit, flex ride, bike share, car share, scooter share opportunities that RTD, through its relationship, and we actually recommend to establish and to hire one more additional person who is the MOD community program liaison, who works deliberately with the locals as well as with the partnerships of those mobility services to be able to enable an umbrella, if you will, like an on-call system of services that we can use, that we can implement, that we can think about how we are deploying in these service areas. There may be cities who are already well established in doing some of these relationships with some of these different partners, but using and leveraging RTD's purchasing capacity, relational capacity, creating some of these opportunities on how you would move forward and establishing that menu of services that then go into an extensive planning process in these MOD service zone areas. But then it's all about money, and we know this. So part of the recommendations includes funding strategies that we do a couple of things, and there are 3 levels. Number one, that we start thinking about how we look at the integration of the service dollars right now that exist are those in the flex ride dollars. And so there is some discussion we'll talk about how we open up some of the opportunities of flex ride to move into sort of a next level technology enabled types of services that are more responsive and also cut our cost per board so that we can enable better services. But to establish a grant program that is potentially a matched grant program with the local services to be able to enable any kinds of services in the community areas in those mod service zones. Perhaps the source of funding for the communities and the local match piece of it is dollars that are coming off of 260, but that RTD is putting that in a grant program type of service. Another option also for consideration is thinking about how we look at the disposition of different services, our areas like our parking services alike. So if we start to think about changing our parking lots, for instance, our park and rides, and maybe leasing them out or selling them off because we have more enabled on-demand services that maybe reduce the need for our parking, which is going to be happening in another recommendation side, that we take those dollars and fund them into what we would maybe call a transportation community investment zone, so that those dollars stay within the community area, and then those dollars are allocated to these first last mile types of services. So those are a couple of funding strategies that we are talking about and proposing. So as we move through then the service partnership side of this, I think the important element is not only just how we establish that menu of services in leveraging sort of a direct relational program that this is really emphasized now with RTD to go out and to seek that, but then also working again with those local partners to integrate those services. We're also strongly recommending continuing on the pilot projects, again, what RTD has already been doing, but that these pilot projects have a couple of different areas. Number one, automation, and continuing to move in an automation and on-demand cycle. And that on-demand piece is something that actually is being delivered right now in Arlington, Texas, and some others. We're also talking about different kinds of pilot projects in regards to things that create better capacity for on-demand, wayfinding, as well as different kinds of first last mile strategies. So as we talk then about some of the operations, and this is some of the behind the scenes stuff, but then again, it's about laying the groundwork and the capacity to be able to deliver enhanced services, which drives more capacity, which drives riders in a better experience. How we integrate all of these services together. And so coordinating all of these services into a single system, this is a behind the scenes, but it also coordinates our vehicle usage. And within some of that, I mentioned to you before that, how we think can maybe reimagine, if you will, flex ride, and put that back out into a market environment to see where we can go with some of those services. It's also important that first last mile strategies were very active and really right on the nose with regards to where we go to the future. And so how we implement some of those services, which also then looks at the infrastructure interface. How we take, and we'll talk about this in parking when we talk about it at another time, but how we maybe shift and change and shrink parking services so that enables, a car share service, electrification service. We take and remove some of the permit requirements, for instance, that we had for our bike share scooter operators to be on site, which is something actually that we've already done. Starting to create again that intersection of the operations. So it's simple, it's feasible, it's seamless, and it exists. So people see it and they can access it. Lastly, again, on the demand management side, it just speaks back to what we already talked about on the mobility on demand. So you can see, the MOS program. again, this integration of these services and the prioritization of how we enable these programs, so that again, you create the seamless experience on both the customer integration, but then in the on-demand world. And you pair that with a high capacity fixed route system that enables sort of that ease of service. So that's where we were with the on-demand, and I'll stop and see if there are thoughts or questions as we go into that. And I can go back. So mod zones, a distinct funding strategy, dedicated personnel to be able to manage these relationships with the locals as well as the service providers, and a menu of options from which to choose. That's the core. And then it's behind the scenes. Any questions? Or comments? All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to be the person always.
No, go for it.
It's a small question, and it just relates to the recommendation of the Accountability Committee. Have you guys talked about using service councils as sort of a tool for implementing sort of these local, the local advice on service operations? Just wondering if that's a system that you've evaluated.
Yeah, so if we, Amy, can you take us back up to the map? So this, I think RTD is currently going to work through some more details on that. And actually, Bill, I see you have a hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just relate.
Oops, Bill, you went on mute.
Sorry, always happens. Anyway, one of the things we are doing, and we will be reaching out to people here in the near future, we will be looking to establish a working group to kind of to address the accountability committee recommendations from the service councils. We're hoping to start that early next year, and take a few meetings to kind of help define what those are, and the who's on those, and that kind of answer those kind of questions so that we can get them established later next year.
Great. So John, until RTD lands what exactly those look like, these 5 areas are what the Reimagine team has been using to create some of that local area service sector analysis. So that these areas could change as RTD moves through that process, but that's what we've been using for now. And I thought this was an opportunity to make sure that everyone saw the chat. Kathleen, just a minute, let me scroll up here. Kathleen, when we were talking about this section about the 2027 system optimization plan, Kathleen asked, what service plan will be in place from now through 2027? Because we refer to talking to the service sectors about that 2027 system optimization plan. So what we talk about being implemented in May of 2022 will be the first phase of the 2027 system optimization plan. From there, RTD will continue the process. As you know, they evaluate their services and make modifications to their services 3 times a year. So they will continue that process and try and build up to that 2027 system optimization plan that's being recommended. That will be dependent on their budget available and the workforce available as well. So they're always taking that into account as they're making modifications. So, they're trying to build up to this 2027, but they obviously have to have workforce in place to go operate the services. So hopefully that answers the question that you had, Kathleen. And let's see here. We've got a couple comments here that I want to touch on. I appreciate Amy's comments. Jill, do you want to are you out there? Do you want to just unmute and?
Sure. Just say it out loud. I was just really appreciating Amy's comment that the core fixed route bus and rail service is really the heart of our ridership and where we're going to increase ridership. And I just want to make sure that we keep that front and center as a primary strategy and not get distracted by mobility on demand, because it can be sexy to talk about bike share and autonomous vehicles. mobility on demand should always be complementary to or secondary to that core service. And just wanted to emphasize that point.
Yes, yes. And we have, I totally appreciate that comment, Jill. I feel like I've heard more from both the technical working group and you all that we will be, that the desire to keep the R and get the R back in RTD, stay regional, get that core in place, be productive. And then you can partner with and do some other complementary things, but make sure that the core of your system is really solid. Audrey asked, can you please share the 2027 SOP? So the 2027 SOP is currently, the current recommendations are being reviewed with the board of directors right now. And there's the individual meetings that are occurring. And then we're going to literally later today, the technical working group will receive invitations for us to have those service sector meetings to look at the route by route recommendations in the second week of December. So Audrey, I know you participated in that first one. I will keep you on that invitation list for those service sector meetings in the middle of December as well. And that's where we'll get to review route by route. Here's what's happening in your particular area. And I think there'll be, we've allocated 2 hours for each meeting because it will take a bit. I think routes that have not seen a lot of change, we probably don't need to dive into in too much detail, but certainly some of those that have had, been combined or consolidated or other recommendations for efficiency are coming out. We'll want to dig into those.
Thanks for explaining the process. I appreciate it.
You bet. Dea asked, can you talk a little bit more about the mod funding strategy referenced on slide 17? Can you head back up to that one, Amy?
Yeah, so we are in the process of talking about this and we'll work through with RTD and the like, but we are talking about how do we essentially create a grant program. And this is, of course, knowing that we are in a fiscally constrained world, but perhaps there are dollars attached to how we operate and how we think about our flex ride opportunities and some of those other things. But that the grant program would be effectively an effort that allows create a matching grant program to execute on services that advantage first last mile services that would have small criteria in regards to service boardings, that would have criteria in regards to looking at how we create and present sort of opportunities, perhaps in equity zones and others. And so it's a process that we're still working through, but part of this would include sort of dollars that are allocated that the cities and communities would be able to, I'm going to say, apply for, or perhaps it's a more active process of engagement saying, yes, this is where we'd like to apply some of those dollars, but with a match requirement. Trying to think about how we can extend services, how we can extend opportunities, how we can extend the service routes that allow us to create, back to Jill, back to the point that you made, how do we enhance first mile, mass mile services that also can create broader accessibility, again, to that core regional program? And so that's what we're looking at right now. Then again, I think we paired it also with another concept where this is all still stuff that the word preliminary, and I'm going to say this is all preliminary, and so I don't want to speak too far out of turn, but the idea that we would look at the disposition of dollars that may come from how we think about parking, the disposition of different parking assets as we make changes, and perhaps funnel those into a sort of transportation community investment fund that would stay in the area, and use those dollars again for those types of services. So those are two of the concepts, but a work in progress for sure,
Yes.
And a lot yet to be done.
So Dea, understanding that this is certainly just a draft and all the details haven't been worked out, I'm curious, is that striking you as something that you, oh, I like that and support it? Or are you feeling like, I don't know how I feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I need to understand it just a little bit more. I mean, to Jill's point, what I don't want to see is that we are distracted, I guess, from just funding the core service. And so just wanting to keep that front of mind as we're kind of exploring these innovative things, but not doing it to a point where it distracts us from actually providing residents what they need.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's incredibly helpful. Thank you. I think our intent in the exploration of this idea is to complement have it be complementary and not have RTD have to sort of refocus on that. But work with but I do agree that it can get distracting for sure. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Joel, do you want to just chime in here? I see you in chat. You're in chat.
Oh, hi, I'm not on the advisory committee. I just was thinking about a hypothetical mixed mode trip where part of it might be a car service and part of it might be transit. Given that transfers are always difficult and people would prefer to avoid transfers, what kind of price signal would there need to be to encourage people to do that transfer to include the transit part of the trip that's going to be more efficient on the road and more efficient energy and air quality wise and all the rest, given that it would be more convenient just to stay in a car-based service. So
Right.
The pricing is going to be pretty important.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
And Joel, I think you're a really good point on the pricing part of it. And it also, when I flipped back to the slide that talks again about sort of that integration, that mobility integrator service, these platform tools that allow us to integrate sort of the seamlessness of those mobility choices and mobility options. And whether it's through a joint venture partnership that includes, those service providers and how the city and others, but being able to create that type of platform is at the base of being able to deliver that kind of integration when it comes to pricing and sort of the encouragement and the seamlessness and the transfer. A lot of use case and a lot of rules behind all of that would be, but that is certainly where the future is going. And I think that, again, back to that primary goal of that as a mobility integrator, in addition to increasing transit ridership, that mobility integrator role will play a critical piece in being able to deliver that.
Okay, thanks everybody for the good dialogue there. As always, please, if you have other things that come up after we get off the call or even as we continue the conversation here, slip them in the chat or send me an email. We'd be happy to follow up and hear any additional suggestions or dialogue that you want to have. So the next section, I know there's been a lot of focus recently on zero emission vehicles, battery electric bus as an opportunity for RTD. Our teaming partner, WSP, has completed their initial analysis of both what it would take to move the fleet to battery electric, and then looking at the facilities as well, because obviously modification of the facilities to support that is an important piece of it as well. So Cliff, I think you are out there and
I am.
geared up to give us an overview of what you learned.
Everybody hear me okay? I've had to switch
apparatuses.
You
Yes, you sound good on my end.
All right, good. Yes, our team is busy, been at work modeling what it would take basically if battery electric bus were suddenly, replacing the existing fleet and were applied on the existing service network. And we modeled two different scenarios basically. The difference between the scenarios are a worst case in the sense that it's the worst day of the year, whether it's the winter or the summer, some of the worst route conditions, whether they're traffic congested or some other aspect that leads to greater energy consumption. That's what I mean by worst case. We tried to do that based on the data that we were using, that we were supplied by Rtd service network. And when we did that, we sort of wanted to push the performance of some of the things that lead to a higher energy consumption. On the next slide, we show you the sort of differences between the scenarios. And in both cases, it's showing that that between a little bit more than half or a little bit less than half of the current service blocks, a block defined as out of the garage back to the division for the service day, that you would need, bottom line, almost double the size of the fleet in order to convert to battery electric vehicles, even with some sort of forecast of improvement of technology in the near term, you would need that many more vehicles. And so part of what we now are going to do is what needs to happen is the facility modification to reflect that investment, and Carrie's going to talk about that, but also the future capital and operating cost estimates are going to be derived from those modeling results. And now Carrie's going to talk about some of the assessments to convert an electric to electrification, independent of what they'll talk about later, which is assessment of the facilities independent of electrification. But this is the electrification question itself.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. So yeah, we were tasked with trying to figure out how battery electric buses can be implemented at each of the sites. And we have 7 total sites, 3 of which are RTD owned, 4 of which are contractor run. And just to be clear, we're not really promoting or dissuading the use of battery electric buses. We're just trying to simply inform RTD as to the real world issues and things that need to be overcome if RTD chooses to implement them. And so what we're seeing at left is a site image of Platt. And the colors that you're seeing are essentially the phases that we determined that would be needed. And it is based on the electrical infrastructure. So we're utilizing about 5,000 amp switchgear to support about 40 buses approximately, give or take in some instances. And so at Platt, we would probably need about 8 phases of implementation. And then we look at the charge components from the street side, the medium voltage switchgear, all the way to what actually touches the bus, whether it is a pantograph or whether it is plugged in. And what do those look like? How much room is needed? Do we have room on the site? We've looked at all of that for each of the sites. We also did analysis of bus displacement. So in any given one of these phases, the buses are going to have to be vacated from their parking spaces so that construction could happen. Where do those diesel buses park in the meantime? Because those diesel buses still have to run en route. Can they remain on site? Do they have to be located at other sites? For example, at Platt, we think that we can remain on site. Some of the other facilities, not so much. We think we'll have to do off-site parking. Additionally, as Cliff mentioned, with a BEB replacement rate that's greater than 1-to-1, the question of parking comes into play, and we think that we're going to run into parking issues as each of the facilities approaches its capacity. Right now, for example, at Platt, on the last numbers we've seen is operating under capacity, and so there would be some room for, additional BEBs. But as it approaches capacity again, there's going to be some parking issues because we have a much larger number of BEBs. And so we can go to the next slide. And so part of our BEB implementation report includes a phasing timeline. So we've assigned a general construction, permitting, everything. We've accounted for that and put it into a timeline per phase, per facility, and then determined whether or not it would be best to do this sequentially or to do them perhaps concurrently, and how much time that would take for each of them. And then this report is actually this BEB implementation report is actually going to plug into 2 other reports that I'll get into just a little bit later. So I think we can go to the next slide.
So we did have a couple things pop up in the chat. Kay asked about assuming no on-route, if on-route charging is assumed. And just so everybody is aware, the current scenario does not assume that you have on-route charging, but the next phase of work, they're looking at how do we put on-route charging in place to see how we can improve the viability of the battery electric buses. And so that is yet to come. Next
Very
phase.
good summary of my chat reply.
As sort of reading. Any other questions or comments? I think this is a really, I want to make sure that everybody's sort of getting the gist of what's happening here, because I think this is one where we want to make sure that you all as leaders in your community, and this being a very, you know, hot topic in our, well, in our world and our state, that you have good informed key takeaways to when people ask you about this, you're part of the Reimagine team, that you understand what we're learning as we're going along. So please ask questions. Kate asked about, are we talking about hydrogen buses?
Yes, so just at a high level, hydrogen means also fuel cell. So it's a hydrogen fuel cell. We'll look at that option as well. One of the advantages, of course, of hydrogen fuel cell are much greater range, which licks a lot of the performance issues that we've identified in the modeling report, but it also comes at a much higher cost than the battery electric option.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? Oh, yes. That there, Kate points out that there's no hydrogen service available in Colorado right now. So
That would be a problem. Yeah, it would have to be trucked in then. And that's not unique to, you know, other places in the country. That's often an issue.
okay, so when you go through that piece of the analysis, Cliff, then will you provide the group some, okay, and here's what this would require?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Kay, I see a hand up.
Yeah, on that note, the Colorado Energy Office just released a low carbon hydrogen study, and one of the recommendations in that was that the state identify some regional nodes for hydrogen usage. You're correct that there isn't currently a station. There's a kind of a research one at NREL. There's another one under construction at CSU currently that will be publicly available. But you know, I think coordination with the Energy Office might be good if that is a scenario that might be considered, and whether one of those stations could be located and you could be part of a node.
Will do. Thank you.
There was a question about any potential to include trolley buses in addition to BEBs.
No. The reason why is because I think the trolley investment would be even more substantially greater. You're talking about, you know, en route overhead catenary. You're talking about, you know, the same kind of investment needed in the depot in order to service those trolley buses. Trolley buses tend to even be more expensive. And so it was sort of screened out in some of our scoping earlier. If it's truly something that the advisory group wants to tackle, I think we could probably touch on it in the final report as to why it was not considered.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. Oh, Kay, do I see a hand up?
I just forgot to lower it.
Oh, okay, just making sure. Okay, let's go on to the next. Now, the other piece, when we move, thank you for that, Cliff and team. The other piece that we've been looking at is an assessment of the bus and rail facilities just in general. So there is the issue of how we handle moving to electrification should RTD choose to go down that path. And that's what we've just talked about. But there are bus and rail facilities in general that have some need to update, expand as we move through time here. So we're going to get a quick update on that as well.
Hi, so back in July, we toured the rail facilities and spoke with staff and took pictures and all kinds of stuff like that. And we determined that the commuter rail facility is at its capacity right now. And due to site constraints, the facility would be very difficult to expand. So if any more vehicles were to be added into the commuter rail system, a new facility would most likely need to be built. And then you can go to the next slide. I'm gonna keep this real short. So the light rail facility is similar. We toured them and we determined that right now Eladi is the only facility for the light rail line that stores any vehicles, and they store 201. After speaking with staff and doing our own analysis, we've determined that really this facility is only built to handle about 160 vehicles. So they are well over capacity. And similar to the commuter rail facility, there's really not a whole lot of space available due to site constraints to expand this facility. So a new facility would most likely need to be constructed as well. And then the Mariposa facility, they don't store any vehicles. Right now, they're mostly a heavy repair shop. And like the other sites, the site constraints and the layout of the facility doesn't really allow us to expand these facilities to store trains. Right, get that next.
And so in addition to that, we also looked at all the bus maintenance facilities, the 3 RTD-owned facilities and the 4 contractor-run facilities. And we looked at all the major building components and did an evaluation of them, just sort of a baseline evaluation of them to determine their overall condition. And we are implementing or using that information to develop a report for the remaining useful life of each of those components of the building, and a maintenance and replacement schedule that would be needed that goes out to 2050 for each of those facilities. And then this would also include, it would tie into the BEB implementation report that we have, which would talk about the needed electrical and the replacement and updating and upgrading that would need to happen in each one of those facilities as well. And so in additionally to that, we have a third report, which is the Idealized Greenfield bus facility site. And what this is a report that would include a space program and a design criteria for a sort of idealized new facility that would address both growth of the bus system, and then also potentially BEB replacement, increased number of BEBs that would be needed. And we're looking at that as possibly having sort of a twofold system, a large facility, and then maybe a smaller satellite facility. And then those could be used as modules as needed in terms of future growth. So maybe one facility, one large facility with 2 smaller facilities or something similar to that. And that's it.
Fantastic.
And yeah, I think
this
slide sort of just kind of sums up exactly what we've already been talking about, I think, for the most part.
Super, thanks, Carrie. Okay, so questions. I know that was a lot, and our WSP partners have put together some great diagrams. I think I sent those in the PowerPoint that I sent to you all. At the back end of the PowerPoint, you'll see a bunch of facilities layouts and phasing plans, and there's a lot of good stuff there. Any questions that you have on the assessment or the findings, the preliminary findings that they've presented here just now? Okay. All right, let's move into the next piece that I'd like to have some conversation with you all about, and tell you where RTD is in the process, is around partnerships. I think probably of all the topics that have come up in Reimagine RTD, the most, I think partnerships and the partnership process may be the one that rises to the top. From the beginning of the process, we learned that there is a lot of lack of understanding of what it is. It's not well defined. There's a lot of partnerships going on, but there is not a good understanding of how local agencies or even private entities come to RTD and create a partnership with RTD. So RTD has taken it to heart, and they are working on preparing a process, what they're calling a partnership process map and a playbook to talk about how they create partnerships for cost sharing, for fair buy-ups, innovative mobility pilots, and then third-party operations. So it covers the range of partnerships that are that typically RTD has in place. One of the main things that they're looking to do is create what they're calling a front door. So if you have a partnership that you would like to approach RTD with, let's start with, who do you talk to? and making sure that the local agencies and their partners are very aware of who that is, and that you understand the process that you need to go through to get into that hopper. And then the cadence and for the partnership requests, and what will be necessary to put, kind of information will be necessary to put that request in. And then criterias and timeframes. So some of the things that we've heard from the group is, we approached RTD with this idea, and then we couldn't get any traction. Like, we didn't know who to talk to. You know, then it went through a process where we had to get buy-in over here and buy-in over there. And there was no champion to make sure that it moved through, even if the answer was no, yes or no, but just losing some of that cadence and meter of getting through the process. So really trying to shore that up. And then what are the decision criteria for saying yes or no, that we're going to move forward with this, or we cannot move forward with it for these various reasons, maybe an answer to. So the intent is that this would be in place in second quarter of 2022. And then just as a note here, there are currently 15 partnerships right now that RTD is a part of, and that there are 10 partnerships in the planning stage right now. So lots of details still to be worked out about exactly what the partnership looks like, and that process map and the playbook. Would love to hear some feedback from you all about if you have suggestions on that, or if there's things that in your own community have worked well. I know several of you have partnerships in place right now. What's worked well, what hasn't, so we can take that into account as we make recommendations to move forward. Any thoughts, suggestions here? And certainly if you don't have them right now, that's fine. We can, I'd love to hear from you though over time as this is developed.
I'll just offer, Holly, that just the notion to me is a wonderful one, just the concept of having this kind of liaison or ombudsman or something, whatever you might call it. But I will say that the criteria is going to be where the rubber meets the road. So it would be, I think as part of this conversation and Reimagine, it would be helpful to have a place in helping to build that out and at least comment on it. So that would be what I'd offer.
That's helpful. Thank you. Let's see here. Dea, do you want to jump in here? In the chat, Dea has talked about she appreciates the playbook and the front door, but encourage a philosophy of no wrong door. So, so with some exceptions, obviously. Do you want to jump in, Dea, and expand on that?
Sure. I mean, this is really coming from the Rtd Accountability Committee, specifically I think it was the governance, excuse me, committee, where you know, oftentimes folks would say RTD was the agency of no. And so I just worry by creating a little bit of a bottleneck, one front door, that at least externally among partners, that perception could continue to you know, exist, and just kind of identifying maybe multiple nodes of entry into partnerships with RTD.
Holly, you're muted.
Sorry. I see what you're saying. Like if you have the front door and say it's a person or a process and you're always getting a no from that, that's not really resolved the issue, but maybe making sure that you understand the criteria, to John's point, and the process to make sure that it is, that we're working through that in a transparent and agreeable manner. Yeah, I can appreciate that, Dave. Thank you. Audrey or Brian, I see there's a couple of comments in the chat. I think it may have been about maintenance facilities. I'm scrolling up here. Can one of you jump in just to make sure that everybody has the information?
I was just asking a question about the end of line station for Northwest Rail in the city of Longmont. So Brian said that it's a work in progress, and I was just asking for more.
Brian, anything more to add there?
Not right now. I can talk to Audrey and we can discuss the relationship between the mobility plan for the future and the Northwest Rail study that RTD is going to begin working on next year.
Perfect, thank you. Kate, I see a hand.
Thanks. I think this is the time, and I want to say this to the whole group, that a lot of people who have suggestions and ideas and opinions, this is the time to put your money where your mouth is. This is time to step up and offer concrete partnership working suggestions. I got a letter recently from Denver Streets Partners that said, you know, we want you to hire more drivers. Great. We want to hire more drivers. The fact that they want us to hire more drivers is wonderful, but it doesn't help. So what I'm suggesting is if you have a suggestion about how to improve things and you want to partner, bring it. Not just, you know, we want you to hire more drivers, you know, but believe me, RTD, as everybody in this meeting knows, all RTD wants to do is to provide transit. And until we have a whole fleet of autonomous buses, in order to provide transit, we have to have drivers. So we would love to hire more drivers, and we're open to any suggestions on how to make that happen. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, let's move on to, oopsie, I've got another message down here. Okay, before we jump into the next one, we have a comment over here. Can you please repeat information about the next round of outreach on the SOP, how stakeholders not here or at the technical working group are able to connect on it? Okay, so after this meeting, I'll be sending the technical working group, the service sector representatives, so for the 5 areas, I'll be sending them meeting appointments for the 2nd week of December. That will be the technical working group, and a few of the advisory committee have reached out to me and said they would like to participate in that. So I've added them to the invitation list as well. And certainly any of you who would like to participate, please let me know. And I'll add you to those as well. So those will be specifically geared, because that's a Reimagine process, to the technical working group for the Reimagine RTD technical working group. We have the technical working group asked us, well, can we invite these people? You know, and several of them said we'd like to invite more. In the interest of basically me not missing anyone, which is hard to do, we've asked the technical working group to forward that appointment to anyone they feel would like to participate in that route by route discussion. I think it's important. I would just say that those meetings, they're 2 hours. I think there'll be a lot to discuss there. And the more we can start, at least with a group that is really knows the routes, the network, the how we got to this spot. I mean, you all have been with us for 2 years talking about our philosophy of how we put transit on the ground and what's important to RTD. So, you know, starting from scratch with someone who's not been part of the process may be a little bit challenging. So I don't think we want too many, but certainly we have opened it up to anyone that the technical working group wants to forward it to. Now, there is a whole public process that RTD will go through starting in January. So the meetings that we're having in December are really around the technical group that understands within your community what your travel needs are, what you're hearing at the local level from the agencies. Help us make sure that we are responding the best we can and understanding that there are trade-offs. You know, we don't have all the money, we don't have all the operators that we would like. There will be trade-offs that come out of this. So starting with the technical, really understanding the travel need, the travel demand, what is available to us from a financial and resource capacity. Then in January, it's open to all of the public. So that will be, we'll take make some modifications to the recommendations based on what we hear from you all. In January, RTD will take that out to the public and hear from everybody, just as they always do with their 3 times a year run board modifications. So does that help with the question? Director Cook, anything else that you wanted to cover there?
No, thanks, Holly. Thanks so much.
Okay, super. Oh, and then she also points out that there's a recording. There is a recording of the technical working group. I don't think there was of the service sectors. Julie, is that right? Not of the, we could do the service sector meetings though too. So yes, we'll try to record meetings as we can and get those posted for people if they're not able to participate, for people to watch. Okay. Now, there's another piece of Reimagine RTD that we also have not talked about this much just yet, but there's been work happening behind the scenes. And I don't know if we have Matthew Downey. Are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here at least for the minute. We'll see if I keep
Okay. Matthew's going to give us a very high level overview of this boundary analysis, both the expansion, the potential expansion of the boundary, the district area, and what that might look like, and what a contraction might look like as well. These are just hypothetical scenarios. They are not recommendations. They're just to help us understand what happens when we grow and shrink the district. So Matthew, do you want to give us a couple bullet points there?
Yeah, sure. So like Holly said, this is kind of a hypothetical exercise just to look at what would be some of the implications if we either expand the district boundary or contract it. And so we used 2 case studies to kind of get an idea. So we looked at one, expanding the East Aurora. So the part of Aurora that's not currently in the district, so kind of east of E470, what would expanding RTD into that area look like? And then for contraction, we looked at the town of Parker, because I'm sure most of you know, there have been some kind of discussions high level about Parker maybe looking into that and what would that look like for RTD. So we did kind of a 2-pronged thing. We looked at the revenue implications of that, looking at what would happen to sales tax revenues for RTD and Farebox. And that we worked with our partner EPS on that side of this analysis. And then we also looked at kind of looking at what would service cost, what would be some potential impacts to service costs. So for the Aurora example, we looked at what would like maybe adding a new flex ride zone to that cost for RTD. And to look at that, we took 3 existing flex ride zones. They're kind of on the periphery of the district. You see there Thornton, Brighton, and Parker, to look at an average of what based on the size of those, what's the average cost per acre to RTD for operating those flex ride zones, and then what's kind of the average ridership, and that's all based on 2019 data. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is looking at Aurora, and one thing I do want to stress here, the graphic on the bottom right, that's by no means like a service plan for East Aurora. If this ever did become part of the district, there'd be a lot more analysis to look at what's the right service. This is just a very hypothetical scenario of what would some service look like. So this is looking at, you see on the bottom left, the yellow part is incorporated Aurora east of E470. And to the right of that, there are some parts of Aurora over there that actually are part of the district just because some of the rules on how things are incorporated. But a large part of it is not within RTD currently. So that was our kind of, the part that's yellow but not blue was our study area. And by 2045, there's not a lot of population there now, but it's expected to get to about 60,000 people. And with EPS's analysis, they projected that would bring in about a little over $7 million annually for RTD with the 0.6 sales tax revenue, which is the part that goes to operating costs. So this doesn't include the extra fast track sales tax that's with some parts of the district. And so the area outlined in red on the right, that is kind of what we identified as the possible flex ride zone. And to operate that based on the average cost per acre, it would be about $500,000 per year annually. And that covers the parts of East Aurora that are projected to have at least 3 people plus jobs per acre by 2045, which is not the entire East Aurora area. It's just kind of maybe about half of it. And then we also did look at what would maybe extending some fixed route service into East Aurora look like. So the black line you see there, that's the Route 10, which in this area, in this part of the district runs along 6th Avenue. So and right now it ends at kind of like Tower Road, Airport Boulevard. So extending it a few more miles based on its kind of per mile costs today would cost about $2 million annually to get to kind of the center of where there is already development in East Aurora. And then on top of that, that would extend the need to put accessorized service along more fixed route, and that'd be kind of based on average cost about $300,000 a year, approximately. And then if you want to go to the next slide. So then looking at Parker, we kind of did the same analysis except backwards, and we looked more at the near term instead of the long term. So currently the current population of Parker is about 50,000, a little over that. And it brings in about $6 million annually for again, this is just the 0.6 sales tax revenue. There's if Parker left the district, there would still be an obligation for the fast track to the 0.4% sales tax. So we didn't include that in this analysis. It's just the 0.6. So that'd be about $6 million lost. And then on top of operating costs for services that serve Parker, you have the Parker Flex Ride Zone. You have the Route P that goes between downtown and Parker, and then the 483, which kind of goes east-west between Parker and Lone Tree. So taking the operating costs of the Flex Ride, Route P, and the part of 483 that extends into Parker is about $3.3 million. So if Parker was no longer in the district, they would no longer need to operate that service. So that'd be about $3 million in savings. And then just one thing to keep in mind. So we just kind of looked at some very specific monetary implications of this, but there are other things to consider. If Parker was no longer in their district, that doesn't mean obviously that people can't use RTD in Parker. They would still have access to the light rail lines. They just wouldn't have their own bus service. But then another thing to keep in mind is that currently, since Parker is in the district, even though there aren't parking rights, or there are parking rights in Parker, but people in Parker can pay the in-district parking rate at a parking ride for RTD. But if Parker was no longer in the district, they would have to pay, residents would have to pay more for any parking ride they use. So yeah, so this is just a very high level kind of analysis, some thinking of what might happen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. So Brian over in the chat said, just to reiterate, these are just illustrative. We are not by any means proposing either of these. They're just to help us understand. So it's really just an exercise of understanding how we might estimate what happens if the district grows or is smaller. I think you probably are all aware that amongst its peers, RTD has one of the largest districts to serve and is one of the lowest in density because of the size of that district. So it is always a question that is coming up is it the right size? Are we the right size to ensure that RTD is actually able to provide quality service throughout the district? So any questions or thoughts on that? I would say that there's no recommendations coming out of that, just a discussion for discussion purposes. Audrey?
Thank you. So what are the next steps? I assume that there's more attached to this exploration than what you brought forward to us here today of these two examples. So what are you expecting to do next?
Yeah, I think we literally have just finished this piece of it and submitted it to RTD to say, okay, well, here's what we learned. The next step really is for them to review that in more detail. There was some dialogue around, it would be good for us to understand how the part of the process at the federal level, money comes in, as you know, Audrey, based on the UZA and how what the urbanized area looks like. So RTD thought our next step will be for us to look at how looking at the UZA and how it changing over time as that's changed through the census would change and impact RTD. So that's our next step. And other than that, it largely is for informational purposes. I think one of the things that came up in the technical working group was when you look at something like, you see those 60,000 new potential population out in Aurora that is not currently covered. It's a real opportunity for RTD and Aurora to, before that is developed, to start talking about how do we make sure, if you want transit service, how do we make sure that the development comes forward in a transit supportive way? Start those dialogues now, so that we don't end up trying to respond to maybe development that isn't very transit supportive. So I think there's some opportunities like that, and we'll bring those back to you as we continue to learn more. Let's see here. Let's see. Lynn asked about discussions with the board suggest that the target in the next few years is to return to 85% of the previous service. The 2020, yes, so the 2027 SOP has been built to the 85% of 2019 service target. So yes, that's what we have built that to. And that is somewhat lower. When we started, you'll recall that when we started the Reimagine RTD SOP process, we knew that RTD had overextended itself, and it was not financially viable to continue to operate the services that they had in place at the time. So you'll recall that we started out with a 92% target, but as through COVID and more evaluation of the financial analysis and where we are now, the current financial projection is 85%. Of course, that still assumes you have to get operators in place to even get to that 85% level. Okay.
I'll just offer, Holly, that to me, that's just part of the concern. I mean, when I think about just this notion of reimagining RTD, and we're building the service plan around sort of this contracted notion of transit service, to me, it doesn't speak to what I think, we were trying to get to was a vision for how do we make transit or drive transit as a bigger mobility tool for our region. And so I just will offer that as just a point of comment. And I also say this, that it feels like this service operating plan, that the notion is that we're going to start going out with this plan. And we in this group that have been together with you for quite some time here, haven't had a chance to see how, at least in a rudimentary level, the staff team is seeing the implementation of the values that we just went through in specific on the ground service changes. And it feels like that would be something that we would want to have as an initial conversation here, so that we could say, oh, wow, we didn't really mean that. If, that maybe we need to change the, parameters or the principles to better reflect our goals in actual on the ground transit service. So it just feels like it feels like we're going out now to the community with the service plan. Maybe we should get a chance to have a deeper conversation about that first.
So I love that. And I hope that we can, I think we have talked about what those sort of the philosophy of providing transit is over time. But I think there is an opportunity to have that discussion again at the service sector meetings in the second week of December. So for sure, let's continue that conversation. And it's a little bit easier to have it in the smaller groups so that you can really focus on what that looks like for your particular area. It's hard when we're talking about, 100 different routes across the whole region. But certainly that's important too from the network perspective. And then there was one other thing I just want to touch on to make sure that everybody, that we're all on the same page. So that we have two pieces, to Reimagine RTD. One is this near-term system optimization plan. And it is really looking at how do you get the most out of your financial constraint that you have in place today, your operator constraint, take and just rethink how you structure service to really capture riders, provide the best service you can on the ground. And then there's a mobility plan for the future, and that's a little bit more visionary. So I would say, John, I would like us to, and that's when when Amy's talking about mobility as a service and mobility on demand, and we're looking at first and last mile and some of those things. Those are some of those more visionary kind of things. I don't know how visionary we're going to be. We're in a very practical, like, let's get people back on transit and on the services today. I think this SOP helps us do that. But I would like to not lose sight of being a little more visionary, and this is a tool, as you suggest, in that mobility plan for the future. So let's keep that dialogue going, because I agree with you. I don't want it to be so mired in the COVID that we lose sight of the opportunity we have to create a great system here. Brian, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. John, just wanted to reflect on your comment. We will be making it clear during presentation of the system redesign, the relationship between the guiding principles for Reimagine Rtd that were adopted by the board of directors as a North Star for how we did the system redesign, as well as the strategic plan also adopted by our board. In addition to the traditional approach of safety, reliability, frequency, equity, we do have some guides that we have used to move forward, and it will be up to our stakeholders like you to keep us accountable for the extent to which you believe we have adhered to those principles as we prepare the system redesign and ultimately the mobility plan for the future. So your insight on that is spot on, and that'll be part of the presentations we start doing in December.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is just a little bit of reverse, which is, and I appreciate what you're suggesting, which is that we've had these conversations, we've built these principles, these sort of guideposts, but ultimately there's going to be a moment where we say that the rubber meets the road, and you guys are now taking that out to the public. And I guess to me, would there be a chance, at least for us, to say, whoa, wow, we didn't know that conversation about the principles is now leading to this on the ground suggested service change. Maybe it'd be better to have that conversation initially here with this group, and if not, maybe at least after you've taken out to the public, to come back and have a follow-up conversation around the reimagined principles.
So I think I just want to go back. It is going to this group, with a technical working group first. That's in December, and then it does not go to it's not revealed to the public. Although, I mean, I suppose people could join the meetings until after that. So the intent is, in fact, to get feedback from you and the technical working group prior to it being public. So I'm not sure if we're saying the same thing, John, but I think so.
Okay, I think you are. That was the clarification, and I really appreciate that, Holly. So thank you.
Thanks. Bill, I see you have a hand up.
One thing I did want to say is that, with the SOP, again, this is going to be an iterative process. There is going to be some, feedback that we're going to receive throughout. I mean, our first level feedback is directly from board members about some of the, the options, and we may make some adjustments associated with that. We may not. Similarly, when we talk with, the TWG, and I would emphasize that, we're using these service area sectors, going to have this more focused conversation, and anybody on the advisory committee is certainly welcome to attend those meetings as well. So just make sure that those are open meetings to everybody that's involved with Reimagine, and that we will, again, take that feedback and consider that as we move forward. So there is going to be an ongoing dialogue, we think, throughout the process for the recommendations as we move forward.
Super, thank you. Tammy?
I had my hand up and then kind of Bill just said kind of where I was going, but yeah, I agree with what John was saying about how, people aren't really paying attention right now. It's kind of like I take this information back to my other city council members and I talk to people about it and people don't really get it because right now we're in this place that we're not traveling and the volumes they're not the best right now, but they're not awful. So there isn't that need to get on the light rail to beat the time you would make otherwise, right? But so I think the dialogue, we'll have to, once these things start coming into play, people are going to go, wait a minute, what happened here? So I also just wanted to say I really appreciate all the efforts that you and your team have done. And in RTD on this. I mean, you guys have just really spent a lot of time on that. So thank you very much.
We're making headway. Director Geisinger?
Thanks, Holly, and I'll second that. I appreciate all the great work. There's a lot of good information here. Just so I understand, and I can go through this more with staff later, but with the SOP and what you're going to be bringing to us, some of that will be starting in May, but you're really putting together a plan for the service through 2027, right?
That's right. The SOP we refer to as the 2027 SOP. Yes.
So how will that work with local service councils if we put those together later as the plan is, as I understand it? If the plan's already built.
Bill, I saw you start to jump in there. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think with the service councils, it is going to be a vehicle. I mean, the way you can look at it is that the 2027 SOP is our vision, and that the implementing framework is done through our normal service planning process, which happens 3 times a year. And, we fully expect that the service councils are going to be very involved in that process and service planning process. And so those will, as the changes, and as those are going to be dependent on resources. And, the big resource right now that we're challenged with is the operator and, supporting, resource standpoint. And those are going to continue to drive what we're going to be able to do. The SOP is that vision. And again, if something changes, if we can get more operators on board, we can do it faster. And I think that's one of the things that we try to say is that we think that it's very resource dependent, and that we're going to be doing this through our normal process, and we're going to be switching from Reimagine to kind of that process with the 2027 SOP is that kind of vision of where we go for service in the next few years.
Thanks.
Director Cook, I think I see a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. It's awkward with my phone. Just to follow up on that question, then Bill, is the work of the service councils in this conception to identify timing or tweaks, or I'm just trying to get a sense for, to the extent we're working through accountability committee recommendations right now, whether or not this is feathering into the process well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it as like I said, the 2027 process is the vision and where we want to go, in the next few years. And then individual run boards, it's going to be dependent on what our operator count is, what our resources look like. I think from a financial standpoint, and others could speak to this as well, we think 85% is that sustainable level. But the resource issue is the challenge, and we'll have to work through those and work to get input from the service councils as we go through that process. Define that. I mean, like I said, the first part of next year is really to define those service councils and who's on them and kind of what their role is.
Okay, and just a follow up, if I may, 85% relates to the service we provide. Are we thinking about identifying a metric that incorporates service people take advantage of that we facilitate or integrate? Can we develop a secondary measure so we know if in fact more service, if not from RTD, but more service generally is being offered?
I love that idea as part of our discussion about partnerships and the metrics and trying to make sure that the intent of the partnership is to really bolster the overall service provided. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think, at least as the Reimagine team, we've not had discussion specific to that, but I've just made a note of it. And I think that's a great idea as we start to move forward with the partnerships and how that comes together and is evaluated. I think that's really interesting.
Thanks.
Okay, well, speaking of that, I think one thing we've heard and have been hearing for even pre-pandemic is one of the main challenges for RTD is the workforce and making sure that we have enough people. And we often refer to it as the operators, but really there have been concerns with or not enough people from workforce, maintenance, cleaning, a whole host of workforce challenges that are in front of RTD, but they are around our country, all over. This is not at all limited to RTD, but across the nation and transit agencies across the nation. So RTD Existing Challenges, really what we're talking about here is attraction to the job and then retention at the job. And there are some issues that are both, systemic that need to be addressed. And then we need to be looking and having our eye to the future as well to talk about, when we're talking about the workforce, of what new skill sets do we need and what new types of people do we need at RTD to make sure that they are addressing that future and evolving need within our transportation system. So we've done an initial review and evaluation. There was staff interviews. There was an employee engagement survey where we found that I don't think that you're surprised to hear that engagement, there's a common workforce tool that people use. How engaged are people? In other words, they want to do the right thing. They're pretty excited to come to work. They are in and supportive of the agency. And you probably are not surprised to learn that it's been low at RTD. And this is even pre-pandemic. So I imagine that pandemic exacerbates that. We looked at a state audit. We did a peer review. We looked at the recommendations made by the Accountability Committee and then the RTD's strategic plan that was put in place as well. And there are a host of recommendations that have been made. They're preliminary at this point, and we can certainly send you a list of those. But if we go to the next slide, what I've done here so that we're not going through recommendation by recommendation, there's really 5 categories of recommendations that have been put in place. The first is looking at work culture, and these are all strategies around trying to swing our attitude to being positive, beliefs, behaviors, positive in a positive direction, so that we just generally look at RTD as I am happy that if I'm a workforce at RTD, I'm positive about that. And I feel that I'm doing something positive for the community as a whole. And I'm happy to go to work, that kind of thing. Public relations, these are strategies to promote the benefits of transit within our community. Career paths, that people understand their career path and how they might grow and evolve their skill sets within RTD. This fourth one here is diversity. So strategies that seek to have the composition of RTD staff match their customer base and be broader, so that you have variety of languages spoken and that you have the ability to communicate and work with a broad customer base and attract a workforce from a broad customer base, or a broad base as well. And then the structure, these are strategies to enable partnering with other agencies to provide, to attract and retain and train staff as well. So hoping to grow the workforce opportunities through that. What I think the main thing here is, if you have ideas, and Director Williams touched on this a bit, if you have ideas for RTD, we would love to hear them about attracting and retaining workforce. This is a very important piece of the puzzle. And we want to make sure that if you have any ideas that have worked in your agencies, we'd like to include them and hear them. If you have opportunities for partnering with you to support attracting and retaining workforce, we'd like to hear those. We did hear a few good ideas from about CDL licensing and several other things from our technical working group. So please send them our way and we'll make sure that they're included in the overall recommendations. So I'll just pause there for a second. Any thoughts or ideas around that work that we're doing on the workforce? Suggestions? I was thinking we should all do double duty, your regular job, and we're all going to go figure out how to be bus drivers too. Get 2 jobs. Let's see, Ron, I believe you have a hand up.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, just to let you know, I'm Vice President of ATU Local 1001. It's imperative, in my opinion, to restore the value in the workplace. 22 years ago, when I started at RTD, it was a great job. It was a value. You were looked on the society as having one of the more prominent jobs in the community. And in the years since, the position has been dumbed down to almost seems like you're at the level of expendable, where before you were really valued as a skilled employee. I think the viability needs to be reestablished in the position, and the importance of the position needs to be re-emphasized in order to go forward, because you get what you attract. If you keep dumbing down the position and keep making the position seem like we're expendable people and you're easily replaced, that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get anybody that's willing to make that lifelong investment in the company, and someone that wants to stick around and see things grow and grow with the company. And right now we're not there. So I just wanted to speak on that element. And I mean, I see the other categories, I mean, which is great. I'm really enthusiastic that this is being examined. I'm really enthusiastic about that, but I also hope that a real approach is taken to the problem. And I do know, and I do realize this is a nationwide issue with driver shortages and things of that nature. But I do think that RTD can be a leader at taking the steps in restoring viability in the position, so it can attract the quality workers that we need and that we deserve. And like I said, the thing about it is just attracting people that want to make that lifelong investment. They got me 22 years ago, and I'm sure there's other people out there that's willing to step up to a great job. If they're coming into a great job that they can make a lifelong investment, they'll be more than willing. But RTD has to do their part to make that happen.
Yes. Oh, Ron, those are great points. And to Kate, Director Williams over in the chat says, we need to start talking about how bus drivers are the future of our climate. This is one aspect of, this is such a great and valuable community amenity. The people who are operating the service should feel and know that they are so valued and feel that they are doing this great community service, rather than feeling expendable, as Ron was suggesting. So I could not agree with that more than I do. Thank you, Ron, for your comments. Ben, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I just was curious why compensation isn't on the list in a discussion around how not just operators, but mechanics and everybody are paid. It seems to me that's a foundation for, and to a lot to what Ron was talking about.
Yeah.
If you want quality people to make a lifelong commitment to a career like this, you have to pay them accordingly.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure that's happening. And
Absolutely.
I'd like more discussion about that.
Yeah. So Bill or Brian, can one of you, I feel that I'll be out of my league if I try to discuss the union negotiations and how that works. Could someone else help step in here?
Well, all I'll say is I know that that very issue is a big part of the discussion that's happening with the CBA currently, and that's going to be an ongoing thing. And the expectation, the timeline for that is that the negotiations are ongoing and they're expected to be wrapped up in the February timeframe, is my understanding. So that hopefully some of that issue is addressed and there's addressed to everybody's satisfaction. I can't go into any more than that because obviously I'm not part of the negotiations, but I know it is certainly an issue that they are addressing head on.
Okay, thanks. Then I saw that Dea had a suggestion here. Dea, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what's being lifted up are issues that have been experienced in other industries, and specifically the construction industry. I mean, even with Central 70, that was a really big issue in identifying the workforce. And so it really took a coalition of nonprofit organizations that were looking at not just the workforce issue, but more of the wraparound services in order to actually make some headway. I will say it hasn't, it maybe hasn't yielded the aspirational results, but I think they're getting there and getting more folks interested into the construction industry. The other thing I'll say, and this is based on what I remember from the Work Now program, I mean, there was a really focused effort on getting more women into construction industry. And it just has me thinking, like, how do we actually address that, the root cause of maybe getting more women in positions of as operators, and what are those barriers, and really just getting to the root rather than throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, those are good. Yeah, we do have one flagged that does specifically call out women, which I think is, we got half of us out there are women. So hopefully that's a good pot to start with, right? Okay, thank you for that, Dea. Okay, so I don't see anything else in the chat, and actually, I don't think. Shelley, I see a hand up, Director Cook. Did you, I think this might be from before though.
It is. Sorry about that, everybody.
No worries. Okay, so next item up is, you'll recall that the last time we were together, we worked in small groups and we did a scenario planning exercise, and we asked you, to work in small groups, talk about these different scenarios, and then prioritize some strategies that we had put together. And the intent here was for us just to sort of think critically about what happens in the future and how RTD can respond to that future to be resilient and strong and responsive to a future that we can't control all of the outcomes, all of the future scenarios. So here were the 4 scenarios. These are the 4 small groups. On the right side, we talked about what if funding is high, which is exciting. That's if you're on the right side, it's always good, right? You have funding to work with, which, as it turns out, solves a lot of problems. So funding is high, but telecommuting is high too. So in this scenario, you don't have people returning to work now we're out in the year, 2040, 2050. This is again, trying to put our visioning hat on. So we're not in the immediate. So we're out in the future and we have funding available to us, but telecommuting is high. So that traditional commuter 9 to 5 from the suburbs to the city center or to the job centers is not there. They're not making that travel pattern. They're making other trips, but it's not that one that transit has typically been able to capture. So that's scenario 1. On scenario 2, we continue to see a low workforce. We continue to see that we do not have enough people coming to the table, operators, and we see that telecommuting is high. So not only do we not have that easy to capture commuter trip happening, but we also don't have people to operate the service. So we refer to this one as dire days. Somebody referred to this as going through the, I think it was Commissioner Levy referred to it as going through the grieving process when she was working on dire days. Scenario 3, we referred to as exploring efficiencies. So this was workforce low. You could also consider this funding low, and telecommuting is low. So you don't have the workforce in place, but you do have people coming back to the office in that traditional travel pattern. So you might have some demand there because telecommuting has sort of turned off a little bit at least, and people are coming back to the offices. And then scenario 4, telecommuting is low, so people are traveling to and from work somewhat like they used to, and funding is high. And again, I would say that we call that one favorable future, and boy, that one is certainly easier. Again, money solves a lot of problems, so that one was a nicer one to work in. So then we provided 11 strategies and asked you all, as you broke into your small groups, which you would prioritize for RTD under your particular scenario. These next 3 slides summarize what we heard loosely from you, from the technical working group. We also did this exercise with the Citizens Advisory Committee. And these are just try to put some structure to these strategies. So what we found is that the information that Amy talked about earlier in the presentation, where we are a mobility integrator and RTD works to really seamlessly coordinate these third-party providers and make sure that the customer has a real easy, I can get on the service, I can travel by RTD and transfer it to a different mode. That seemed to resonate across all 4 scenarios. So regardless of if you had money, you didn't have money, workforce was low, commuters were low or high, that being that mobility integrator seemed to make sense across all of those scenarios. The second thing that we heard, and we have heard consistently through the Reimagine process, is that providing that high capacity regional backbone is an important piece of what RTD does, and they need to focus on it and they need to do a good job at it. So people said that across all 4 scenarios. They said that continues to be a priority for RTD. Partnering with local agencies, we've talked about this already a bit, also continues to be important. And then increasing or diversifying the funding sources to try and limit the rise and fall of funding with sales tax was something that was also identified as that's a good opportunity to shore up and make RTD more resilient over time. So the second slide here, this next slide down talks about conditional strategies. So these strategies are those that had maybe neutral outcomes under a particular scenario or positive outcomes. So there was 3 identified here: providing flexible on-demand services. And what we heard was that RTD should partner with other operators to provide that lower capacity on-demand service, and then explore how on-demand tools can be used in those higher capacity, again, that regional backbone. Implementation of autonomous fleets. We loved that, but there was a lot of discussion around the don't get distracted, which is what we've heard here today too. We should be looking to implement that as the industry and the world starts to move towards that automation, but the RTD isn't going to necessarily be at the forefront of that. And then adding high capacity corridors through the investment of bus rapid transit. This was one that was very well supported, but harder to put in place when we did not have funding in place. So this was really more focused on when funding was available. And then the final set of strategies here, which there's 5 listed here, but I broke 10 into two different categories. Providing low capacity, short and local service. This one was not identified as being the best or a prioritized strategy. But again, focusing on that regional backbone that RTD is most equipped to provide. The adoption, which I would love to hear from people on this, the early adoption of the zero emission fleet. This has been something that's on our minds. We're talking a lot about, but you saw from the presentation we had earlier that it is likely to require be more costly, lots of investment in the facilities, an increase in the number of buses that are required. So all of it's costing more and has the potential, you know, with every dollar we take from there, the potential to take service away, and you know, it doesn't necessarily attract riders to the service itself, even though it is such a beneficial piece of the equation. Strategy 7 was complete the unfinished fast track system. So this one, under dire days, we put a red on here. This is going to make a lot of sense when commuters, if we're getting commuters back in that typical travel pattern, it makes a lot of sense, but we need to make sure that they're coming back and that the services that are being provided are in fact matching the travel patterns that we are seeing in this post-pandemic. So we just need to be critical of those and make sure that they're returning to what we thought we would be, and that those recommendations that we had in the fast tracks continue to make sense. And then 10, we broke up into 2, which was shrink the district boundary and expand the district boundary. We talked about reducing the district boundary could be considered if you wanted to eliminate non-transit supportive areas, but you can see that if you do that, there is an impact to RTD's funding sources. So it negatively impacts the district as a whole. And then expanding the district, really what we want to take into account is we would like those areas that when we think of 60,000 new people coming in the city of Aurora, we'd like to make sure that if RTD expands the district boundary, that it should really make sure that those land uses are transit supportive and that they're designed so that RTD can efficiently provide service to those areas. So these, I felt like your input on these in the scenario planning exercise was incredibly valuable. This will be used to help us prioritize as we develop a needs-based plan and a fiscally constrained plan. These suggestions will help guide those investments over time. So I'd like to hear from you how you feel about that, just initial look at what we think we heard. Anybody want to jump in? Generally, yeah, that seems reasonable. I'd say,
Director Williams, it looks to me like it's follow the money. Unfortunately, looks like what everybody came to the conclusion of.
Yes, it really having funds just helps you be more resilient and nimble and respond to what the future holds is really, which is, I think that's the case all the time, but certainly we've learned that through the pandemic as well. I see a hand up from Riley.
Yes. I just think that while partnership is an amazing idea, I just don't know which local agencies RTD could partner with to provide that local service, or if the counties have to go in and create more local agencies, like Boulder, for example, creating a new. They've been talking about having their own bus service for a while, and in some ways they do have their own bus service. So that's what you mean, right?
Riley, can you tell me who you're with?
No one.
Oh, okay. All right. I just want to make sure. All right. Thank you for joining us this morning. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay. Well, as you absorb this, and if you have other questions or comments, that would be, I would love to hear them. So please send along your ideas. All right, well, we are coming on the final stretch here, and Julie is going to take us through the next few slides.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. And thank you guys so much for hanging in there with us. I know there's a lot of information today. If you want to go to the next slide, just really quickly, wanted to give you a quick heads up on what we've been up to on the public engagement side. In 2021, we've had quite a bit of meetings. We've just finished a series of telephone town halls where we got some fantastic feedback. And a big chunk of our time over the last few months has been meeting. And thank you. A lot of you guys helped us set these up and participate in these meetings with community advocacy groups, TMOs, TMAs, Colorado Center for the Blind, just different organizations that represent, we're really trying to capture that, making sure that we're really getting a diversity of feedback. And what we've been doing in these meetings, they've just been terrific, is very similar to what we did with you guys. Ooh, it's been 3 or 4 months ago now, where we went through and we reviewed the guiding principles, and then we said, okay, how do we achieve these? What is it that we can be doing from a strategic perspective, from a tactics perspective? What are the things we should be thinking about? And the great news is based on those meetings, we have over 300 specific comments for strategic ideas for RTD's consideration, and a lot of that we have actually folded into the information that you presented today. So that's just been terrific. Moving forward, big focus on the systems optimization plan here in the short term. In January, we are going to have a new online engagement tool that I hope is really going to be helpful for everybody to be able to turn maps on and off, zoom into certain areas, provide us comments, really help a broader group really understand, including the public, what we're proposing for the systems optimization plan and how those pieces are fitting together. Then, as we discussed, we'll be looking at that January, February time, doing a lot of public outreach, really trying to make sure that we're touching everyone and getting feedback from everyone on the plan that we are hopefully, fingers crossed, looking at getting in that March timeframe, getting approved by the RTD Board of Directors. Next slide, please. So just real quick on our next steps here, again, we talked about 2027 board a consideration in early 2022. We have those service sector meetings. Just as a reminder, please let us know if you'd like to be invited. We are coordinating everything through the TWG members. We just don't want to miss anybody. That's our biggest concern. So we're working with the TWG members to really make sure that we're gathering everybody into those meetings. That's important to make sure that they have a voice at the table. And, we're just finishing up our last few meetings with the technical working group, the advisory committee, and we will be reaching out to you about our plans for next year with this group. So let us know if you have any questions. But again, thank you so much for all your feedback and, hanging in through this pretty long process. But we're excited. We're getting close to the end here.
Yes.
Any other
All right.
questions?
I don't see anything in the chat. Anybody want to jump in? All right, I think that's all we have today. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.